Hey everyone, welcome to a new video. Welcome to my channel. My name is Micah. Today we are going to be talking about my Urban Decay Vice palette little family. So every month I'm planning on doing a look into like my eyeshadow palette collection, going over like different palette families that I own. I've got 4 Urban Decay Vice palettes, and these are of course long discontinued products. These were all limited edition products for like different Christmas releases that Urban Decay did years ago. And for me, this is where my love for Urban Decay kind of comes from. This was back when Urban Decay was like hot and new and they were doing all the right things, it seemed. And I think that these were also some very coveted palettes at the time. By now a lot of people have been decluttering their Vice palettes because they're not that new, because they haven't really stood the test of time in that sense. What you should know about these are all, I think, 20 pan eyeshadow palettes. They all have the same format, the same layout on the inside. But what these lacked, and what became a thing right after these were sort of popular, was to have a dedicated color story to a palette. And these are just, as you will see once I open these up, just a very haphazard mix of different shades, and there doesn't really seem to be a lot of rhyme or reason behind why these particular shades end up in these palettes. The 1, 2, 3, 4, they definitely did start to change that as color stories started to become more popular. So we do see a little bit of a color story in the palette coming up in the Vice 3 and in the Vice 4, but not for the palette as a whole. So the first 2 are very sort of like a mishmash of colors, and I think that that's one of the reasons why these palettes didn't really last in terms of what is popular. And makeup of course changes a lot. However, I've kept these around precisely because of those haphazard color stories. Let me explain this to you. The reason why I still like these is because these are the palettes I will reach for if I go like, ooh, I want that one particular shimmering blue. I know I will find it in one of these 4. So these are, well, there are some neutrals in every single one of them, but they're very colorful. They're not like bright rainbow colorful palettes. And I actually think that by now, since so many brands have been doing rainbow palettes, I kind of see this kind of aesthetic, not necessarily these shades, but this kind of aesthetic of just having really good colorful shades in a palette, but then also tied in with a color story. That's sort of where I see makeup going. But for me, these are still some of my OG favorite palettes that I reach for if I want that perfect gold shade, that perfect silver, that perfect teal. Like, I've got everything I need kind of in here. Do I still use these a whole lot? No. Did I, at the time that I bought these, use these a whole lot? No, because at the time I wasn't really into color. I definitely taught myself how to use color along the way, and it wasn't really happening for me at this time. So I might have had many more dips in these palettes, but yeah, in terms of like use, these have been very gently used, which is why I still feel okay putting these on my face, even though they have long since been discontinued and you can no longer find these. So what I want to do in this video today, after that very rambly intro, is to go through each one individually, show you my favorite shades, tell you what I like and don't like about this palette, etc, etc. So let me clear the decks and talk about the Vice 1 first. So here we have the Vice 1, and yes, this packaging looks really grubby, especially if I hold it against the light like this. The reason for that is that this has this rubberized packaging that's very similar to what you get if you buy NARS. Some of my older NARS products also started to do this, where the rubber starts to get really sticky over time, and therefore it gets really grubby. You can't clean this because it's just, everything just sticks to it. It's almost like it's turning into the sticky side of sellotape. So there's glitter all over this, like it's an absolute hot mess. You did get this like beveled Urban Decay logo, and then over here, I'm not sure if you can still see it, but it said the Vice palette. These are very difficult to know which one is which unless you remembered, because these do not come with names. You got a really good hinged mirror, as you can see. It's a really like full-size mirror here in the lid. And then if I think I'll just hold the palette like this so you can see it a little bit better. Plus it's also marking up my table every single time I touch it down. So I think I'll just do it like this. And this is what I mean with this not really having a color story. Like, in here, we get some gorgeous jewel tones. We just do. There are some gorgeous jewel tones in here. You kind of go from like darkest to lightest. That's sort of how this palette works for me. However, in terms of how these colors play together, there's just not a lot of rhyme or reason to it. It's not as if it's like, ooh, you know, we've got some warmth up here, but then everything else is quite cool tones, save for these two at the bottom. So it's got some really good shades, and I will swatch all of them for you in a minute, but it's got some really cool shades for sure. But this is the kind of palette where, as you can see, I just like dipping into, for instance, the purple. This Vice shade is quite possibly one of the best purples ever made, and there's also a couple of purples in the Vice too that I absolutely love. Some of the shades in these palettes have popped up in other palettes. For instance, Chaos is also in the Wired palette that was released in 2020. I think Armor over here was also a shade in the Naked Smoky, and I think some other ones may have popped up for every once in a while, either as lipstick shades or whatever. So these are shades, some of the shades in these earlier Vice palettes have been reused in Urban Decay's line. Now, before we swatch everything, there is one, like, if I ever declutter this palette, I know I'm going to miss it because of this. This is the shade Blitz. I don't like golds, but I only really love golds when they have a green tone to them. And I'm not sure if you can see that here. Let me see if I can show that. But if I just swatch this, I mean, and this was the first one that came out, right? So this is like what, 2012, maybe earlier? And this shade still looks like this. Do you just see how this gold has more of like an antique-y, like tarnished gold feel with like this green, well, it's not a green flip, but do you see that it almost has this greenish quality to it? And that is what I really like about this gold called Blitz. Another favorite in here is Jagged. So I think I'm not just going to swatch them row by row. And this one has always been a little crumbly, I have to say. And that was the main reason why these Vice palettes in the end weren't a lot of people's favorites. This was back in the day when Urban Decay just had that very flaky, crumbly, shimmery texture. They've definitely improved their quality over time, but Urban Decay shimmers used to be the ones that you could only make work if you use the glitter glue. But yeah, this I still like as well. It's got an olive base and then lots of gold sparkle running through it. And it's one of those shades that if you keep blending it, that's when it really comes alive. So you just need to get past that crumbliness and then it works really well. I think I'll just do it like this because then I have my hands free and I can actually talk to you about the palette while we're looking at it at the same time. So I told you I really like Vice. Again, quite a satiny kind of shade here. But that would be Vice. And that's just, oh, it's so great. And I really like Urban Decay formula because it is buildable. So this is the kind of shade where if you take some more and you put more on, that's how you intensify it to what you see in the pan. And as you can see, this almost has like a blue quality to it. So this is what I mean with the Vice palette, just offering something more unique. I've always really liked Junkie too, which is a really lovely teal shade or like a turquoise almost. So there we have Junkie. It reminds me a lot of Deep End I think it's also one of their eyeliners, but it's also in the 15th anniversary palette that I have. So this is a really nice like turquoisey, tealy blue, bluish green. Love that. That still swatch is lovely too. And I also really liked Unhinged, which is this one right here, which is a bit lighter than Junkie. and also the shade Rapture, which is like a grayish purple. Let me see if I can put that here for you. That's also been one of my favorites in this palette. So it's like a very nice cool toned plummy kind of shade with lots of gray to it. I love it, and this, as you can see, it swatches beautifully still. So if I were to use this palette, then those are some of the shades I would go for, but it also has some shades where I'm like, really? So for instance, Chaos in here, which is also in the Wired palette, like it looks pretty, but for a matte bright blue, it's just, the Chaos in the Wired palette is better than this. Like this skips a little bit. You can build it up for sure, but bright blues, especially at this time, I remember NARS also had this bright blue shade that you just had to build up until Oblivion, and it still, as you can see, it still has a bit of sheerness to it. So that was never my favorite, but this is a really good matte blue if you just want to blend something out, but not as a main feature in a look, I feel. Penny Lane, as you can see, this shade over here, it's barely been swatched because I'm not a huge fan of these like bronzy, coppery kind of shades. It's just not my jam. So, but that still looks pretty. It's just not something I go for, something that warm toned. And also this Provocateur shade, that's again one of those, ooh, do you see how much kick up that has? That it's pretty, but it's got just a lot of kickback, and it had a lot of fallout, I remember. So while this is something that I would only put like as an accent shade in the middle of the lid or maybe in the inner corner, but to put this all over your lid was a bit risky. Let me see, another shade I barely use is Black Market. Everybody knows, if you watch my channel, I don't love blacks, and blacks are just not really Urban Decay's forte. Like if you swatch this, it just doesn't look all that black. It's more like a deep charcoal, like grayish shade. And also these two like deeper brownish shades at the top, I remember not being the best. So we have Desperation and also Muse. Like this feels pretty dry now as well, the Muse shade. It does swatch okay, but it's one of those shades that has some sparkle running through it, and the sparkle doesn't really show up on the lid, so that's a bit of a shame. And then this is Desperation, which like the black, like the mattes in these palettes just were not the main feature. And then we just have the middle of the road, the shades that I do like, but that, you know, I don't feel very strongly about in terms of liking it or not liking it. But Occupy was, I remember this being nice. This was okay. It's again like a deeper, like almost like a steely blue, but I just felt it was a bit lackluster. Like I would have wanted more sparkle, more shine, something like that. It just doesn't do enough. And then I think, yeah, I already swatched all of these, save for, is this called Noise? And then we have Armor, which is also in the Naked Smoky, as I mentioned. So that would be Armor, which is, again, fine. Nothing to write home about. Yeah, and this pink has always been a bit, like, that's never been the best. But yeah, again, you can build it up. But yeah, a hot pink shade like this, especially at the time, I didn't know what to do with. Currently, probably, if I were to wear this right now, I would probably wear it in a crease. And then I don't think we swatched any of these lighter shades. These are nice, they're okay, but we've got a matte here called Laced. This feels nice and creamy, but it's probably just as light as my skin tone, so it probably doesn't show up very well. No, you can't see that. And then we have Freebird, which is another like pinky, shimmery kind of shade, which again is that very flaky texture like Provocateur. Again, there we have it. It's like an inner corner highlight or something. Nice enough. I used to be all about the creamy mattes for like the brow bone, but that's a shade I will definitely not use anymore. So that one is a bit superfluous. And then Echo Beach and Nevermind. Like Nevermind, this is like a taupe. So you know how I feel about a taupe. This would be Nevermind. I do really like that. And then Echo Beach is more of like a champagne-y kind of shade, but it's a bit too satin for what I would go for right now. So in here, the stronger shimmers are very flaky, and the ones that aren't that strong are just a little satiny. So that's why it doesn't really go with modern tastes anymore. But like I said, it's got a couple of really good standout shades, which is what I keep it around for. Let's move on to the Vice 2. This is the Vice 2, and in the Vice 2 I definitely have some more favorite shades than in the Vice 1. namely this silver. So where the Vice 1 has the gold, this one had the silver, and in here we get Shell Shock, and it's still this day one of the best silvers in my collection. Forget Anastasia Beverly Hills Cyborg from the Sultry palette, that's a good silver. But if you want something brighter, lighter, like truly metallic silver, this. I think that in this palette it's a bit more obvious which shades were my favorites because I definitely use this more. But I also really like Stash, which is this nice olivey green shade, which in here I felt the texture was much more consistent. And also here Betrayal I liked, and Voodoo I liked. I liked Damage in here too. So Damage is a little dry feeling. These are the two purples. Oh, nope. That's the purple. So those are those three shades right there. Especially this. This is like one of those shades that they put in the ultraviolet. Like, if this would have been in the Naked Ultraviolet, I think a lot more people would have liked it, because do you just see that's the kind of shade that you would expect in the Naked Ultraviolet, and I feel that the shade that's in there is sheerer and not as great as this one. I also love Prank in here, because we know I love teals, and this is a great, more blue-leaning teal. Do you just see that? It pulls almost navy, so that's a good one too. And I like Madness, because I like those blues. I really like the Vice palettes for the bluey shades. They do some really good blues and purples in these. So that's already quite a few. Oh, and then Radar in here is also in the Naked Smoky. Like Armor in the Vice 1, Radar was in the Naked Smoky, which is just a bronzy brown shade. And I also really liked the two pinks, which is a bit unusual for me. I especially like this matte called X-Rated. It's a really nice baby pinky shade. And then Coax next to it. I used to combine these all the time. And then with a bit of black liner, I thought this was really pretty. So those two pinks. So in this palette, as you can see, there were just so many things that I loved. There weren't that many things that I didn't truly enjoy. Lovesick comes to mind. It's a black with silver shimmer, which just, like, that's just not a great shade. So these palettes definitely had some duds. I also didn't really love Smoke Out. Like, anything that's like dark like this, I'm just not a fan of. Poison, not a huge fan. Like, these three shades just look identical on the face. Let me see. I think, yeah, Strike is the gold in here, but it's just not as strong as Blitz. It's just a little bit more yellow toned. It's not as vibrant. It's not as smooth and buttery. And then we have Derailed. I did like Derailed in here, but it's just not a shade I went for a lot because it is so dark. But that is something that nowadays I might get some more use out of. It's like a darker taupe. And then we have that lighter bottom row. So you can see now a pattern starting to happen. It always features like a row of neutrals in one way, shape, or form, as we will see in a minute. And the Vice 2, it's the bottom row. So we have Dope. And, you know, these are nice, but this is like, you know, you can't really use this as a transition shade because it's got a little too much shimmer. So it's not perfect, and it's just, again, non-existent on my skin tone. Toxic is like a rose gold kind of shade, but it's not as good as some other rose golds. It's got a bit more copper running through it as well. Like, that was not my favorite. It's just a bit nondescript as a shade, I feel. And then we have Habit, we have Ambush, and we've got Rewind. Rewind I love, because that was like my crease shade of choice. It's like a cool tone brown. So that I did like. And then this is Ambush, which again, for like a neutrally look, this worked, but that's not why I bought these palettes. I bought these palettes for the colors. So that's why this wasn't my favorite shade to use, because I felt I had those a million times over. And then Habit, again, is very similar to my skin tone, so that's not really going to show up. I did like this a lot more even than the Vice one, and of course the packaging of the Vice 2 has to be my favorite, because the Vice 2 packaging is sort of like, it takes the Vice 1, but then it has these like smoky purpley sort of tie-dye design to it. Loved it. So the Vice 2 I liked a lot more. Let's move on to the Vice 3. And this would be the Vice 3. Now, I've told this story quite a few times, so I'm going to keep it short and sweet, but this was the one that almost got away from me. This was limited edition for Christmas one year, and because of this outer packaging, which I didn't love, I kind of was like, oh, I don't want it. It was this, the Vice 3, the packaging was inspired by Miami Vice, very 80s inspired. I didn't love it, but then I started seeing people doing looks with this palette, and I was like, oh my, I missed out on it. Long story short, I found it on the US Urban Decay website, had it shipped to a friend who I met up with in New York, and I dragged this across the States for the next 3 weeks during my trip and then took it home. It's a thing. So this is the one where, you know, I went to blood, sweat, and tears to get my hands on it. It's one of the very few makeup products where I ever went through that much effort to try and get my hands on it. I can tell you that much. But here you can start seeing a change in the Urban Decay Vice palettes, because even though there's not one cohesive color story in the entire palette, we do get a color story in each one of these columns, as you can see. So we've got cool tones, we've got like berries, like plums with bronzy browns. We've got some greens and blues, and then we've got the neutrals over here. So a lot more going on here, and this one is definitely my most used one because it's not as haphazard. Sonic is quite possibly the one shade that I wanted to get this for, because at the time there was nothing else like this on the market. Right now you have tons of these kind of shades, but this like warm berry flip kind of shade was just not around a lot at the time. I just knocked my camera over, so I hope we're still in the same frame. I'm sorry if it switched, but just look at this palette for a minute. And if you have the Born to Run, now grab your Born to Run and look at that color story. Do you see any similarities? In my opinion, the Born to Run is the warm-toned, more updated version of the Vice 3. I really like Alchemy in here too. That's like, you know, Hellride, I think it's called in the Born to Run. It's a bit like that. Dragon is one of the best greens Urban Decay has ever come out with. There you go. Let's maybe build it up a little bit more. Remember, Urban Decay formula needs to be built up for it to go on fully opaque sometimes. Freeze and Heroine. Hello. So this would be Heroine. Again, the mattes, they definitely worked on their matte formula over time. But again, if we build up Heroine, you can smooth it out, and it looks like a really good grayish navy, I feel. I also liked, because at the time I was more of a neutral gal, remember? So I really did like Broke Down, which is sort of like Radar in the Vice 2, but this like golden tone brown. A little bit like a bronze. That was pretty. Oh, and Vanity. I did like that too. Right there. But it's a little bit more muted, I'd say. The colors in the Born to Run are a little bit more saturated, perhaps. And everything, almost everything in here has some form of shine. And this like berry shade and also Angel I really like too. So this would be Bondage. There's like a deeper berry plumish shade, and then Angel, that one has always been a little flaky, is again another like lighter taupey kind of shade, you could say. But do you just see that almost everything in here has some form of like a satin shine to it? So if we then look at the palette again and we look at the shades that I didn't love as much, we are again sort of coming down to the neutrally shades here. So this was great for like setting up the look, but like I mentioned, I didn't buy these palettes for the neutrals by any means. So, but this was a good like all matte look, and this was the first time that Urban Decay really put this many mattes in a palette. So, but they're all very neutral. And then I think, yeah, Lucky, what else is new with me? These like goldeny bronze shades. Like, I feel like this shade sort of pops up in every single Vice palette. So by this time I was definitely done with it. And Rain is like just your standard like bronzy brown. That was also not my favorite. Right there. Like it's pretty. I mean, I've got nothing against it. It's just, that's not why you bought a Vice palette, for the browns, you know. And then we have Bobby Dazzle, which is like a shimmering white. Nah, just a bit lackluster. I mean, it's pretty in the inner corner, but that's about the only thing I did with it. And I felt the same way about Last Sin, which I did use quite a bit. Like, this is still workable on like your moving lid, but as you can see, it's just all very sort of muted shimmers. It's not like boom metallics. And then we have Defy, we've got Revolver, and we've got Alien. And Alien I did like, but it was just, I like the pinks in the Vice too just a lot better. And again, this has that like satiny feel to it, which wasn't my favorite. And then Revolver, again, it looks super black in the pan, but then it was more like a charcoal. And again, shimmer, or at least some sort of shine. It's like a satin. And then here, which again, I don't mind satins. And then we have Defy, which is just a bit of a lackluster matte, perhaps. And then we got the Vice 4, which possibly wins in terms of packaging, because this oil slick packaging, isn't that just stunning? Mine definitely looks like an oil slick. These were all unique. So some of these palettes were prettier than others on the outside because this oil slick wasn't the same for everyone. But mine had the full oil slick, which is what I was happy about. And over time, the hinge of the mirror also started to change a little bit. So they got a little sleeker. The packaging became a little bit better executed, I feel. And again, in the Vice 4, we got color stories, but we got them as rows rather than as columns. So the Vice 3 is more like this, and this one is, this whole line is a look, that line is a look, this line is a look, and that line is a look. Again, there are some really good one-off shades in here that I love, but I think the 2 and the 3 have to be my favorites. However, standout shades in this one, I always swatch this shade, but it's called Flame. Again, at the time, we didn't have all these lovely indie brands doing duochrome shimmers, but this is like an orange with gold shimmer. It doesn't really have an actual flip, but this is when that sort of became a thing. I love Arctic because these like turquoisey shades are just some of my favorites, but it has a lot of like loose sparkle, which is what Urban Decay used to do. In here, the green is pretty too, called Grasshopper. It's a bit lighter than the one in the Vice 3 called Dragon. That's a bit more of a like forest green. This is more like a grassy green, so it's a bit brighter. And then I think I actually like Low in here, and also Crowbar. Those I love too, even though Crowbar is, again, one of those very crumbly ones. But it still works. But this is when I felt also the Vice palettes became a bit repetitive within the own line. So where, like these 2 shades, I feel we also kind of got in the Vice one. But I did really like those. I like Harlot, and I also liked Beatdown. So that's that purple there. Like the Vice palette just had good purples. And Harlot was this really, really stunning, gray toned, lavendery kind of shade. It's like, I don't have anything else like this in my collection, which is why I sort of keep it around for that one shade. I'm not gonna lie. Everything else was a bit lackluster. So if we look at some more swatches, then we have Bones, which again was okay, and we have Grip. So these are nice, like lighter shades. Like Bones was quite unique because it has a bit of that dirty undertone. Like it's not fully white, it's not a champagne, it's not pink. So it was pretty unique from that perspective, but these very light shades, I just feel they're very superfluous in palettes usually. Oh, and of course Deadbeat, the darkest shade in the palette, I never like. I just don't. So, but this is perhaps when we got a little bit more of a black. It's still not very black. And then also this deeper purple towards the end, which is called Pandemonium. It's pretty. It's a nice purple, but again, a little deep. Like when I put these kind of things on, it just kind of all looks the same. Next row down, we have Framed, which is a very nice, buttery smooth, just cream colored shade, which again is good for like brow bone highlighting or blending things out. Fastball I did like, but this is not the kind of shade that really works on my complexion. This is the kind of shade that makes me look ill. 1985, pretty, but again, a little dry, a little, like it's like a magenta shade, which they're so hard to do well. So this is not my favorite shade in this palette. Like, you can make it work. You can very easily sort of build it up and make it work in the end, but this was, again, just not, it doesn't really go with anything else in the palette, I find, because it's too purple. It's too pink to go with the purples, and it's too purple to go with any of the greens, I find, so it didn't really add up. Underhand, which is like a burgundy kind of shade almost, but I think it pulls actually quite purple. Yeah, it's like a plum. Yeah, a very reddish tone of plum, which is what I don't love about it. Again, like, do you just see, like, these kind of shades just make me very sickly. And then again, we have Discreet in here, and also C Note, and we have Robbery. I mean, again, fine. This is what C Note looks like. That's a good transition shade for my complexion for sure. My hands are getting a bit dirty. C Note I want to love, but it's just, because it's got so much gray, it's a bit lackluster. And then Robbery is a nice, like, goldeny taupey kind of shade, which I normally am down with, but I like a taupe to be more gray toned than this. From this bottom row is just the two mattes, so Bitter and Delete. Those are the ones we haven't seen yet. So these are good, but Bitter is just super warm tone, and I feel it doesn't go with anything apart from those like orangey shades. And then Delete was just way too dark for me. So these were the 4 Vice palettes that I own, and I just wanted to sort of go in depth and really swatch all the shades for you, because I like, even though these are older palettes and you can no longer get them, like, I think you can see why I like them. They just have some really good one-off shades that can really sort of complete a look, and that's what I use these for. I don't really go to these anymore to create full looks. However, please let me know in a comment down below if you want to see me film a palette bingo as with these palettes. Then I will do that as part of my next Get Ready With Me towards the end of the month. So when I use things for my Shop My Stash, I thought we could do a palette bingo with these 4 palettes and pick like 1 or 2 shades from each palette to create a look. So let me know in a comment down below what you think of that idea, because then I can definitely do that if you want to see how these perform on the eye. We can make that work for you. Without further ado, thank you very much for watching this video today. Please give the video a thumbs up if you like eyeshadow palettes as much as I do. I just make these videos because I love a good eyeshadow palette, even if they are older, even though they may not be exactly what we're looking for in palettes today. I still want to go for it because it's just, I don't know, there's just something about these palettes that I can't get rid of these. So yeah, if that's you, then please stick around, because I make regular content about eyeshadow palettes over on this channel. So if you'd like to stick around, then please subscribe, and if not, I would like to see you in my next video. Bye bye!